And it was like, wow, what a review. Holy moly, I don't think I could have written a review about myself better than this guy.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Cookies and Coffee with Steven. Today, our guest is a highly sought-after concertmaster of recording sessions here in Los Angeles. Concertmaster of the Hollywood Bowl Orchestra, has won awards, has studied with some of the best violinists in the world, and I think he's just a really nice guy. So everybody, please welcome violinist Bruce Dukov.
Hi.
Hello.
Steven, hello.
What is it that got you into music? When was your first experience with music? What made you decide you wanted to start studying it?
Well, I grew up in a very musical household. Both my parents were professional musicians. My mother was a very, very accomplished accordionist and pianist. Everybody wanted to play the accordion, so she had a very busy teaching career, which was actually in a studio in our house. But she and my father, who was a violinist, they had a duo called Sporn and Dukov, and they toured all over the world before they had the kids, which is myself and my sister. And when they finally had the children, they decided they were going to stay at home. They didn't want to travel as much. And I grew up from a very early age listening to music, classical music in the house, plus them performing all the time and rehearsing. And my mother was a very talented arranger. She was able to take popular pieces as well as classical pieces and arrange them for violin and accordion in a way that was just so satisfying to listen to. It was amazing. And my father was absolutely Heifetz crazy. So I grew up listening to Heifetz all the time. And he also loved Milstein. So Heifetz and Milstein were the two predominant artists in his record collection, which I wore out.
So with a household that was that musical, when did they finally like make you start to have to?
Okay, so when I was 8, on my 8th birthday, they started me out with this old Hungarian teacher in the Henry Street Settlement, which is a school to which my father actually attended back in the early 1920s when he was a kid. And I took lessons there once a week. Every Saturday, they drive me down there. And I made great progress for the first year. I mean, fabulous progress. And when I was 9 and 10, I started, getting pressure from my school kids. Playing violin is not cool. And it was, rocky road, 9, 10, 11, and the Beatles came out. And when the Beatles came out, I thought, I want to learn the guitar. So I taught myself the guitar, but because I had some dexterity from learning the violin, it was a pretty easy transition for me. And I became pretty good at the guitar, and everybody wanted me to be their lead guitarist in these little fledgling groups that were starting out. So I really didn't take the violin seriously at all from about age 10 to about 15. And I even had a ruse that I developed. My father was a hi-fi fanatic. He loved, in the 50s and early 60s, it was a big thing, the hi-fi. Everybody was getting this great equipment. And my father, every 2 or 3 years, would buy a new tape recorder, to my mother's chagrin, of course. And what would you do with the old one? Well, he gave me one. So I thought, wow, if I record myself for 10 minutes playing the violin, I can sit in the room and play it back and everybody will think I'm practicing. And my grandmother who lived with us was downstairs. My mother was teaching in the studio. My father was working during the day. And they thought I was practicing until one day I left it running and went to the bathroom. And my grandmother came upstairs and she came into the room and she hears the violin, but no Bruce, right? So I was busted. But
it's like fair.
I was fooling myself. All those wasted years,
Yeah. Oh, wow. What was the change? Because eventually you got your bachelor's and your master's from Juilliard. So what was the change that made you decide to pursue that?
Enormous change in my life that I owe the school forever was the High School of Music and Art, which was the school that they loosely based the movie Fame. When I got to that school, I auditioned and I was playing, I would say on a very mediocre level. But I was better than all the other kids that came in there because they were also public school after all. So all you had to do was really draw the violin, the bow across the strings, and they put you in, But I was doing more than playing just the bow across the strings. And all of a sudden, because I was elevated for my talent there, instead of being denigrated by my school buddies in junior high school, I started thinking, hey, maybe I have something here. And then they put me in as concertmaster of the senior orchestra. And I'd always wanted to study with Dorothy DeLay because she was supposed to be the most wonderful person as well as a great teacher. Now, Ivan Galamian, who was the big guy at the time, was not such a nice, personable guy. He was a tough teacher, and I didn't want tough, you know.
Right.
It still was a cut-up, you know, and that was that. But so I got into Juilliard, and that sort of changed everything. The thing that really revolutionized everything for me, because my first year in Juilliard, although I knew everybody there, and they were all great, and I was really kind of low on the status of what the levels of violinists they were. That spring of my first year, my mother passed away, and I was offered a scholarship to go to Aspen. And in those days, Aspen Music Festival was quite small. There was like one traffic light in town, and there were dirt roads. And Charles Traeger, who was a magnificent violinist and the solo violinist for the Lincoln Center Chamber Society, offered me to come out there and study with him. Charles Traeger, as my teacher in that summer, just completely revolutionized my playing. He freed me up and changed me into a completely different violinist. So when I came back the next fall to Juilliard, I was playing on my level of playing had jumped. I can't even say in yardage, you know what it was, but it was considerable. It was like 3/4 of the way down the field to the goal, you know?
Eventually, you ended up moving overseas.
Right.
And doing a lot of work there. I'm curious what led to that.
I had some contact with Yehudi Menuhin, and I played for him. And he organized a recital, kind of a debut recital for me in London in June of 1974. So after graduating in May in Juilliard, I went over to play this recital. And that previous semester, I've been studying in New York with Nathan Milstein. And Milstein had a master class in Zurich. And so it made sense if I played the recital in London at the end of June, then I can just go to his master class in Zurich, which would be really nice, and spend a few weeks in Switzerland. So I went to play this recital, and then I went over to Milstein's recital, and my aunt, who lived in England, I have a rather large family in England, and she sends me a clipping of a review that I got in the Times of London. And it was like, wow, what a review. Holy moly, I don't think I could have written a review about myself better than this guy did, and he was in the Times. So I thought, you know what? I'm going to take a leave of absence from the doctoral program and go to England and see if I can pick up on this great review that I had, maybe get some management. So I went there and did that for 3 or 4 months. And while I was there, I met a guy who was on a Fulbright grant, and he was a violinist studying with Simon Goldberg, who was a wonderful violinist at the time. And he said to me, why don't you apply for a Fulbright grant? And I said, well, I've already got all my degrees. You know, normally don't you have to go to a school and continue? He says, no, just write them something that you think is going to be interesting to them of what's going to make you a better violinist, or whatever you think is what your purpose would be to have a scholarship. So I sat down and I wrote a whole thing about, well, my training was mostly focused on my technical capabilities, but I thought I'd like to have more of a European sensibility. And Simon Goldberg was a very highly respected musician for his Mozart sonatas and his Brahms. And I thought, this is a guy I could say I'd like to study with him, because this would be opening up a whole new musical side for me to explore. And I got the scholarship. So I went there in the fall of 1975 and stayed until that year was up. I got an extension of the grant till September. And while I was there, I met this phenomenal woman. Woman, she's a girl of my age, you know, and I was just fell head over heels in love. And that's who you met.
Yeah.
My wife. Yeah, we've been together 43 years.
Wow.
We've been together 44 years, but married 43.
Congrats for that.
And I decided I was going to stay in London. So I had my debut at the Concertgebouw in September of '76, and then tried to continue the solo career, which was, sparse, but picking up. And while I was in London, I met a guy who was a violinist. He was what they called a fixer in England. A fixer was a contractor for the sessions that go on in London, which is an incredibly busy town. Every single week I was doing 3 or 4 variety shows for different comedians and singers. So it was incredible. I got in because this guy loved my violin playing, and I was like the young upstart there coming in, because most of the guys were the older studio scene, very staid. They used to come in coats and ties to sessions. They would wear a tie and everything. Yeah.
A question I have, I'm going to link to one or two of those television broadcasts that you were a part of when you were over there. Now, those solos that you played on some of those, are those arrangements you created, or are those arrangements somebody else created?
No, they're my arrangements. What happened was I was playing in a variety show in the orchestra. It was called Search for a Star. And they would have every week singers and comedians. Singers and comedians. And then some weeks they'd have comedians and singers. The musical director, he was a fantastic arranger. I mean, a great orchestrator and a really great musician named Alan Ainsworth.
Uh-huh.
And I went up to Alan one day and I said, Alan, you never have any instrumentalists on here. What about if I was offering something that's kind of a crossover thing that I could do? And he said, well, let me talk to the producer and we'll see. So we came up with this idea to put something together, and they asked me to make a demo so they could hear, what I was talking about. I was doing this demo. I thought, you know what? I have a friend in Chicago, a very dear friend. We've been close since we were 15 years old. His name is Robert Levin. And Robert Levin is a manager. I sent him a recording of this demo, and he loved it. And he said, we have a very wealthy violinist friend who lives in Chicago named Howard Gottlieb. And he got Howard to get interested in financing, actually making a record of this crossover stuff, which is called Departures. Now, on my website, there are some tracks from that recording.
Right.
The signature one was called For Chrysler's Sake. Fritz Kreisler's Preludium and Allegro. And I tied that in with another piece called Viva Vivaldi, which was based on Winter from the Four Seasons. I got them to put me on the television show, and then, I got a number of other television shows. I think I was on 6 or 7 in the next 2 or 3 years trying to promote this record, which then was picked up by CBS.
Thank you for watching. For more great videos, subscribe to the Maestro Fox YouTube channel. To learn more about the Maestro, visit StevenAllenFox.com.